right?
Yeah, we're the only private one too, and we're where ROTC started.
Oh, really? That was the first place for ROTC?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Before that, when they graduated, they just became non-coms.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Does everyone there go through ROTC or do you have?
No, now they have like a civilian side, like A&M.
Okay.
Like I did the military side for a year, and then I found out that I couldn't commission, so I just went to the civilian side and suffered. Paid the same amount with nothing to do, so we just day drink on a dry campus. So it was fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
But it's okay because we had a bar on campus, but we were a dry campus. So if you can explain that one to me, it'd be great.
I was gonna say that's it's an interesting twist.
Which is funny because it's named after the school's founder, and he was a prohibitionist.
That's fine. That's ironic.
Yeah, there's a sign that says "the wettest place on the driest campus."
So Bill, you just have to take you have to take courses so often?
No, I just like.
Or you just like taking?
Want to bring a glass, so I grab this.
Oh,
Okay. Notifications. Okay. Can you hear us okay in here, people on Zoom? Good to go on the sound?
No.
All right, good.
No.
We're slightly different in the position with respect to the
They were talking though, I
microphones.
don't know if we can hear them.
Oh, yeah.
But
Jamie,
can you hear
Jamie, can you talk to us a little bit?
Can you hear me okay? Testing, testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
You're about to have a very quiet class.
This system is not one I've actually mastered. I don't know if it has. Let's see.
I was doing a class with Damon when I was in high school, and it was just like this, and there was always,
What's that?
one on the bag?
Oh, no, thanks.
there's always tech issues. There's always something. Although they also tried
Can
doing
you,
it with the
try
system
again,
with the
Jamie?
camera.
Hello, can you hear me? Testing.
No, you can't hear him.
No?
They also tried doing it with the system where the camera would point to who's ever talking,
Oh, right.
and it would just turn around and just like point at the window. That was like 6 years ago though.
I don't know who this is, but it's probably can test the sound, so we're gonna do it.
Did you try changing the sound output in the bottom right?
Let's see.
On your computer.
Sound. There's no way to, let me see. PC audio.
There we go.
Gone are the dark clouds that hide me blind.
I'll take it.
It's gonna make you dry.
This class will now no longer be about archaeology. It will simply be listening to John Legend, seeing classics. Okay. All right. Good to go. Got sound on both ends. We got 4 people in classroom tonight and a bunch on the screen, so we are looking good. All right, does anyone have anything that you'd like us to pray for as we begin?
It's pretty hard to actually hear you right now.
It is?
We could hear you better before. Right now, you're pretty faint. At least on my end.
Yeah, good, thanks.
It- It's the same at my end too.
How did I,
Yeah, I can't hear anything either.
what did I do?
You normally sit this close? It might be because you're not as up far under the mic as you usually are.
Yeah, that's what I was worried about, but at first they could hear me.
Drop the banished prop to the back table.
When I switch to PC audio, whether it's. Can you say something, Phil?
Hello,
Is that better?
can you hear me?
Barely.
Yeah, but it's really faint.
Really can't hear them again.
But I think I could, I think somebody just rustled some papers and I think I could hear that.
I can hear you now. Yes? You can probably hear this every week.
You have your icon with just your picture and that's on mute, is that?
Yeah, that's normally the case, because I'm not usually using that for sound. Why? No, I think that's correct. We may just have to.
You could always pull yourself up on there again, then use your speakers, so then
Yeah,
it would be going.
I might have to pull back to the mic. Actually, let me just test that first. Can you hear me if I speak right here? This is good? Okay. All right.
You can't hear them. They can. They're off again.
Are they off again? Jamie?
Yeah.
Can you say something? Yep, they're
Yeah,
good.
can you hear me?
All right. We truly have achieved sound
Somebody was
synthesis.
talking. that.
Sound synthesis has been achieved. All right, I'll sit back here and hold forth. Okay, good.
And I'll crumble a little more.
Yeah. Bill will crumble the chips.
We kept asking
Okay.
if we can, we never asked if we should.
All right, let's return to the question. Does anyone have anything we could pray for as we begin?
Maybe just an Our Father for an increase in vocations.
Okay, increase of vocations.
I have a cousin that's battling COVID. I see you.
Okay, COVID, cousin with COVID. Anyone on Zoom? I'll be on the road, going to Madison, Wisconsin, coming back here in the next couple of days, so we'll pray for travel mercies on that. All right. I'm gonna move forward a little bit. Well, that's not good. All right, let's just get rid of that. All right, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Holy Father, I thank you for each of these students and for the opportunity to work with them in class over this last 7 weeks and do get a sense for archaeology and for how it can bring to life the concrete historical context for your work in Israel and the early church. And we pray that you'd help every student here to move forward with a joy in their lives as we enter what I think of as the beginning of the year, the school year, but September anyway for all of us. And we looked up to these requests, increase of vocations, Bill's cousin, battling COVID, and on travel. And we pray for them together. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, here we are for Archaeology Week 7. We are left our friends, the ancient Israelites, back returning from Persia. We talked about the book of Esther and the Persian period. Last we chatted. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that this week and just look at some of the archaeology of the period. And then we're going to look at a couple other things as well. So first thing is going to be the Greek influence on Yehud in the Persian period, the Greek rule of Yehud, then moving into the Hashmonean period. We're not going to say a ton about that and point it out. We're going to talk a little bit about Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then we're going to mention archaeology in the New Testament and have a group discussion of the Talipot Jesus family too. So that's our agenda for tonight. Of course, with any other things you'd like to mention. But the first thing I want to point out is we have here a community centered in the Persian period, at first around the city of Jerusalem again. Of course, there are people all around the area and up in Samaria as well, but the focus of these early settlers back in Jerusalem was to rebuild the wall around Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple, which they managed to accomplish eventually. You can see here the Temple Mount as reconstructed. These are some reconstructions, but we have the Temple Mount. We've got the, oh yeah. Is it hard for you to see over there?
No, I can see it.
Craig, can you see it?
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay. The Temple Mount with the Horse Gate, the Valley Gate, and Siloam Pool. A relatively modest city at this point, but lots of people living there. You've got things going on outside there, and this is the center of Israelite life.
Is this a artist's rendition of the archaeology, or is there anything like of the text?
A little bit of both. Yeah, a little bit of both. Yeah, because we can't fully excavate the Temple Mount. But in terms of the rest of it, they've done a fair amount of excavation, like the Siloam Pool and the gates and all that. There's an estimation of the size of the Temple Mount based not only on the Bible, but on what's left there from the Herod's expansions, which are recounted in detail. So we have like historical documents to talk about Herod's expansions of this temple and what they started with and what they ended up with. You have very detailed descriptions of that temple in the first century that they're working with.
So that expansion is kind of matches. Like when we get back up that far, we're really matching things pretty closely.
Very tightly. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, very tightly. It's pretty secure, even given the fact we can't totally excavate it. We have a fairly good idea of what Herod's temple looked like. And we'll see some reconstructions of that too, but it's much bigger. But this is, even he wrote this. He wrote all this out, like what he did to expand it. And we have the mound, and some of that temple complex is like the Wailing Wall, and other parts of it can be described archaeologically. Yeah. This is a Persian period drinking vessel, or raiton from Sepphoris in the north. And so this is, you can see the Persian influence on the archaeology and on the pottery that's going on here. And I want to point out these coins, because these are Persian period coins. And this is very interesting. There's a whole book on the development of Yehud coins from this moment all the way through the Bar Kokhba revolt, which we're going to look at example of all of the, but there's like hundreds and hundreds of these, right? So you can really study these and talk about the typography of them and so on. But here we have coins that are used by Israel, minted in Jerusalem in the 4th century, that are borrowing directly from what we think is the first place to mint coins in the region. That's Athens. And so they take these Athens styles. The favorite is the owl, which was very commonly used in Athens. They borrow it directly into the Yehud coins. Here's an example of 2 owl coins. This is just the front. They have the owl. Yeah.
So those coins that were on the left, are those fleur-de-lis, or is that like an early representation of a fleur-de-lis?
It's like a lily, yeah.
Okay.
So the resemblance to fleur-de-lis is definitely there. And since I would have to, I'm not a good enough art historian, or especially European art historian, to tell you for sure, but I suspect that it's possible that the fleur-de-lis comes from imitations of Greco art. But that is sheer speculation on my part. I don't actually know the history of the fleur-de-lis.
It would make sense because the fleur-de-lis was developed out of the Greco-Roman revival period.
Exactly, yeah,
So.
exactly. So that's definitely borrowed from Athens. And then on the reverse of all these are the fronts of all the coins. There's another owl there. Here's a bird, On the reverse, they just have, or sometimes in the front, like this one here, has Yehud. Right, so here's a Yehud there, Yehud. So some of these just have one side, but they're in the script, and some of them have Yehud on the back. But so Yehud is the name of the region, right? So they're the province of Yehud, which becomes Yehuda, Judah. Okay, Judah is just anything with a J that goes with the Bible is a Y. Because that was Germans transliterating it, and then English people borrowing the German, and suddenly it's a J. But that's all that is, right? Yerushalayim, Yeshua, there's no J. There's no, all these initial J's are Y's. Okay, there's some seals here. These are earlier than the coins. These are first half of the 5th century BCE. And these show the use of both Yahweh's name as sort of, hey, this is, I don't really know why they're using Yahweh's name in some cases, actually. But some of these seals just have Yehud. So this is La Chazia, and then this is the word for governor here. And then this is Yahweh, the divine name. This is the same, this is the divine name at the top, and then Yehud down here, and then a name in the middle.
You can't speak it, but you can write it.
What do you mean?
You can't speak it, but you can write it.
Me?
No, you're not supposed to speak.
Oh, yeah. Well, at this point, you have to assume they were speaking it, because
That's
yeah.
what
Yeah, the tradition that you don't speak it, the divine name, I think has to be later. The Qumran scrolls will set it off sometimes, we'll like mark it, we'll write it differently, or put different color ink around it, or we even have a couple times where there's like Hashem instead of Yod He Vav He. So they're definitely marking it as distinct by Qumran, but at this point, when you're using it as a seal to sort of designate your city, or maybe it means for the temple, something like that. These seals aren't holy objects or anything, I don't think.
During this time when they used both Elohim and Yahweh?
Yeah, but yes, but Elohim is generally, yes, they use both.
Okay.
Yeah, they use both. But if they're going to mark something, I don't think there's any seals with Elohim. Elohim is almost too generic for something like a seal. But in the text,
Just Elohim just means God, right? Like
Right,
just a
but-
generic God.
yes, but it's rarely used. Yes, it just is the word God, but it is often interchangeable with Yahweh. Yeah. So, but I don't think it's ever used on a seal that I'm aware of. And then, so my point here is that this is still the Persian period, right? The Greeks have not taken over. They have not beat back the Persians and taken over the world yet under Alexander. But these coins are, and even this style of building in Samaria, this Hellenistic round tower, we're already seeing the Greco influence, the Hellenization happening. So then once you, and this is,
You still have trade though, that's going back and
oh,
forth.
absolutely, yeah.
So there's a lot of interchange back and forth. It just hasn't.
Yes, they're doing heavy
The
trade
governance
with,
hasn't.
right, exactly. You got heavy trade with Greece. Greece seems to have some sort of trading spot in right outside of Egypt. Greece is already really involved in Egypt. They also seem to have a trading spot that looks as if there are Greek folks living there, like down even northeast of Sinai. So they're well into the Levant region with a trading post that's like, seems to have been Greek settlers who then act as a port where Greek people are coming in and bringing their wares. And one of the most common kinds of pottery, which I forgot to put on the slide, is this Greek black and red slipware that's like definitely Greek that's being imported. It's not made right there. But then some are copying that kind of style with their pottery. And you see the copying of the style of the coins and the architecture as well. So even more so in this period than Persian influence, even though Persian controls it. Then the Greeks come along and they do conquer the region. And I love this comparison with the coins. Okay, so you have Judah's coins. My slides are being very laggy, but here's Judah's very like, we made this in Jerusalem. And here are the coins. Okay, you know, they're borrowing the Greek styles. They're very rough, right? And then here are the coins that get made for the province that Israel is now under, which is also includes like Phoenicia. And these are made by actual Greeks.
They're much more uniform.
Yeah, I can't get that. I gotta, I've blocked out part of these coins for you. So you can
There might be
see
a
the
difference between doing
difference
just
between
stamped coins and full molds.
Yeah.
you can see the difference between influence and then, okay, now we're making your coins, you know, now you're part of the Greek kingdom. And these are coins made for the region, but made by Greeks themselves. And of course, much more focused on the emperors, you know, the joint emperors. This is post-Alexander. But Antiochus II up top, Antiochus III on the bottom. Someone's mother, I think Antiochus II's mother on the right. And that's your imperial coin, right?
Are they different materials?
Yes. Yeah, I think the Jew ones are more, I have to look up exactly what the difference is, so I don't want to say the wrong thing.
I've done metalwork before, and the ones that were made by in Judea, they look more molded, and these look like they've been stamped out.
I couldn't tell you for sure, but I wish I'd read this book a little more carefully in preparation for this class, but I don't know for sure what but yes, there could be difference in manufacturing. Clearly there is. So like whether it's stamping and molding difference. I mean, the Jerusalem ones are definitely molds.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Well, the only reason why I'm also coming to that conclusion is because when you have like an imperial system where you need a much larger amount of coin, it's easier to stamp than it is to mold.
Yeah.
So they're probably mass producing these.
Yeah, it could be. I just, the stamping technology at this period is a little bit unclear to me, so I have to check that.
You always have to stay ahead in technology.
Yeah.
Always one step ahead of the forgers.
That's right. This is a Judean city, or Bethshan. And okay, so this is a view, an aerial view of the current ruins. So it's not just the Greek period, but you can see stuff that happened. We have the columns, we have this Colosseum, and so this is Roman, but some of this, this begins happening where you have gymnasiums, you have column features, you have rounded architecture happening in Israel. And it becomes a real, I've mentioned this before, it becomes a very tense situation under Greece. Okay, so in Babylon, they just take them away. Persia, they basically send them back, make sure there's a governor that reports to Persia, there's taxes and stuff. It's very loose. Like they're going to do their own stuff. They're making their own coins, they're doing their own things, following their own religion. It's all pretty happy under the Persians. That's why the Bible represents Cyrus as an anointed king. Right? He's legit. They recognize him as a legit emperor. Here, the Greeks, Alexander, he took it over. It didn't change that much, but when you have the splitting of the satrapies, and then Antiochus III comes and rules over this area, especially Antiochus. Antiochus II is already bad. Antiochus III gets really intense. And then you have direct confrontation, where Jerusalem has a gymnasium. Jerusalem, where Antiochus III comes in and installs a statue of Zeus in the Jerusalem temple. He makes priests sacrifice pigs, right? He forbids the keeping of Shabbat. He forbids circumcision. He wants people to look like Greeks, so beards are kind of a contested thing as well to some degree, not as heavy, but a little bit. And suddenly, you have modernizing Jews, if you will, and Hellenizing Jews and traditional Jews who are saying, we won't do this. The high priest then, as we know from the Bible that you grew up reading as Catholics, the Maccabees, you've got the books of the Maccabees, you have a rebellion that starts with the Judas Maccabeus, or Judas the Hammer, and that is the Jews win, right? Not just because the Yehuds, the righteous Yehud had a mighty army that really defeated the full force of the Greek Empire, but because, of course, the Greek Empire was weakening under lots of different influences, especially Rome, and they had this threefold split, and things weren't going well, and so on. It was kind of a once the Maccabees put up a big fight, then it was no longer worth it, right? So they retreated, right? They were just like, whatever. I take it back.
Kind of like the American Revolution.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that, yeah.
The Romans being students of history, you would have thought that they would have taken the Greeks' lead and not have Nero put a statue in the temple.
Yeah, well, the Romans won that though.
Yep.
The Romans.
Usually when the Romans win, they just decimate a population. We
Well,
still have the Jews here.
That's fair. They didn't back off though. They all right. So yeah, the Greeks. This is Hellenism. It becomes, of course, the most important feature. Here's a Tobiad palace, circa 169 BC. This is one of the ruling families in Israel, the Hashmoneans, and This is this is a style of architecture that borrowed directly from Greece. A magnificent palace. This is not a reconstruction, right? This is an actual archaeological photo, and then here's the reconstruction on the right. So strong Hellenistic influence in the architecture, in the language, right? So hugely important that during the Hellenistic period, the Jews translated the Old Testament into Greek, which becomes the Bible of the early church, so much so that later on, Augustine and Jerome have a huge fight over whether Jerome should even use the Hebrew Bible for the Vulgate. Augustine said no, because tradition is more important than history. And Jerome said, yes, we have to use Hebrew, because no, you're wrong. The Septuagint's a translation. We have to be scholars, you idiot. And Jerome won, convinced Augustine. And Jerome's letters to Augustine, which I've been reading, are very sharp. They're very acerbic. He gets mad at him and makes fun of him for being a bishop, and says, oh, you just want to fight with me to increase your popularity among people in Rome. I don't care. I'm just a monk. I'm not a bishop, you know. Anyway. Jerome, so yeah, the Old Testament in Greek, huge thing, Septuagint. There's all these Jews that have existed in Egypt for centuries now, huge community of Jews in Egypt, where they're even offering sacrifices in Egypt. They've got little temples. They've got a whole Jewish tradition that's happening. They have legal documents. They write in Aramaic. There's a lot of those that are left, and but those people, once of course Egypt gets taken over by Greece, they become fully Greek citizens in Egypt, and that's where you get the Jewish philosopher Philo, Josephus, you know, the Jewish historian. They're coming out of this whole. They're not even originating from Israel. Philo isn't, and they're Jewish and they're in the Greek Empire. And that language and that culture is taken up and used by Rome. So during the period of early Christianity and Judaism, the formation of what we think of as Judaism, that's distinct from ancient Israelite religion, is very informed by the Greek language in a way that it isn't informed by the Latin language until much later. Okay, so this is, I put this table in two spots so you can see it twice, but here is a tomb, a Hellenistic tomb of a Sidonian at Marasha, in use in the 3rd and 1st century BC. Again, we have very Greek style art going on. If you look at the art history of Egypt, the same thing goes on. Drastic difference under the Greek influence in Coptic art versus early, or say Middle Kingdom Egyptian art. So under the Hashmoneans, Maccabees and the Hashmoneans, they rule from 164 to 63 BCE. Judah, Jonathan, Simon, John, Hyrcanus, Aristobulus, Alexander Iunius, Alexandra Salome, and Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II are your kings of the final kingdom of Israel before Rome takes over. They're not an independent state again until 1948. On the right is the kingdom of the Hashmonean kingdom. Okay, so you've got a growth here as well. So at the beginning of the revolt, Judea is a pretty small region here. You've got additions of Jonathan and additions all the way through the kingdom of Alexander Iunius. So this is a big region that they end up controlling. Galilee comes under this way, which is north of Samaria. So if you think of this, when you're talking and you're saying you're a Yehud under the Persians, you mean you're in this little area right here. Samaria is a different region. Galilee, different things, right? Except Phoenicia. Okay. So now this grows to expand all this. Idumea underneath it. This is where Herod is from. He's the Idumean, right? And that bothers people, right? So for us, this may seem like, hey, this is all the kingdom of David, right? This is like a very familiar map. But for people who were living hundreds of years under different boundaries and don't have our Israelite map in their brain, Judea is a very distinct territory from Idumea right underneath it, even though Beersheba is like a place Abraham went, right? So, but being from Idumea isn't Edom exactly, but there's a bunch of Edomites that come over there, so that's why it gives it this this foreign era and why the name Idumea comes about.
So that had to do with what the peoples that are actually transplanted back as opposed to stayed.
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. So you have ethnic differences for sure. Yeah, regional, same kind of region that used to be controlled by Israel or by Judah, but Judea, Yehud has a distinct boundary between where the Edomites and other people, this is not so clear. It's just like the ancient Edomites, but Idumea becomes this region. Samaria, another whole region, and then Galilee, right? Galilee, where Jesus is from, is really a different kind of region than Judea, than Samaria, than Idumea. So Jesus is born down in Bethlehem. He grows up in Galilee, and most of his ministry is portrayed by the Synoptic Gospels, is conducted in small towns throughout Galilee. And this is why he occasionally goes up to the region of Phoenicia, where he meets the woman who's a Phoenician woman, and she says, hey, heal my daughter, or whatever. I can't remember the exact reference, or maybe heal me. Oh man, I can't remember the story. It's his daughter. It's her daughter, right?
Yeah.
Bible scholar failed here. But anyway, she's, and he says, you don't take the food off the table for the dogs, right?
Oh, yeah.
And she says, the dogs get to eat the scraps. And then he heals her. So
In the gospel a few weeks ago.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, she's up here. This is Phoenicia. It's right next to Galilee, right? So Galilee is really on the border there. It's and so for someone down in Jerusalem, for whom all these very important places, including Mount Gerizim and Samaria, and this like long trip all the way up here is quite important, not only physically but emotionally. Galilee is a backwater, right? It's the hill country. It's the country folk up there. You got accents, right? All right. Anyway, so that's the kingdom as it develops under the Hashmoneans, which is important and for what it becomes. Of course, then after the Hashmoneans, Rome takes over and installs a puppet king, Herod the Great. And Herod expands the Temple Mount, and you can see even in today's Jerusalem where this was. This is why you can talk about this a little more clearly. You've got the Dome on the Rock, this is a mosque. But this whole area surrounded by everything else, this whole area with the wall and so on, was the Temple Mount. Right? So this would have been the temple and all this around. So this is and we can't excavate it because the mosque right here on top of it. But this whole area here is Herod's expansion to the temple.
What do they feel is buried under the mosque, other than the temple? Is there two temples?
Well, no, there should just be one. What do you mean by the second temple? Or
The second temple that was supposed to have been built, that's where the mosque is now.
Oh yeah, okay, so this is the second temple. The first temple is Solomon's temple, and the second temple generally is described as the temple that gets rebuilt under Persia and expanded by Herod.
Okay.
So the original structure, the Persian structure, and all of the expansions by Herod would be evidence. Yeah.
All right, okay, thank you.
And maybe some evidence if you dug real deep, you might find some stuff from the first temple.
All right,
Probably not the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so I'm
Right.
just rule that out. But like, but yeah. Anyway, so we've got Herod did a bunch of expanding. You can see he basically turned this whole region into Judea. So by the time Jesus is in coming around here, Judea runs all the way down. Idumea is the thing that passed. Herod, who's an Idumean, got rid of it basically, just made it Judea. And then you've got Galilee is still up here. Sepphoris, the major city of Galilee, is marked there. And you've got these regions over here as well. So that's our, and the Nabateans. Become the Ammonites, or so on, become the Nabateans. Built Petra. We go to Jordan and see Petra. That's the Nabatean site. All right, so this is what happens as you imagine things become more Roman. You're still very Greek influenced. Here is a ritual bath for pilgrims. This is south of the Temple Mount. So this is one of the many ritual cleansing purification baths throughout the city. And this one looks to have been something you would use before you were able to enter the temple area. So on the one hand, if you're a pilgrim, that is someone coming from outside of Jerusalem who needs to access the Temple Mount, or this perhaps could have been used for, I think there were other baths within the city for people to purify themselves. So this would be more of a public one for visitors. But so you'd have to go through ritual purification before you could enter the massive temple complex. And you also were not allowed into the Temple Mount to some degree. There was a court of the Gentiles, but this is an actual inscription banning the Gentiles from the Temple Mount. The text forbids Gentiles enter the enclosure around the temple and warns that death will result for any who fail to keep the commandment. So you can't come into the temple if you are unclean, and you can't do it if you're a Gentile in this period.
And that's written in Greek or Latin? In Greek, right?
Greek, yeah.
So why would it be just only written in Greek if you have like people that spoke like Sumerian that would be like living closer to that?
It was a lingua franca at this point. Yeah.
It's like just like the common language at the time.
Yeah. No, they were speaking Aramaic to each other, but if you're a Gentile, you're going to speak Greek. Even if you're a Jew from anywhere else in that's not just this region, you're going to speak Greek.
So it's like the common traveling language, sort of like how English is now.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Very, very common. Extremely standard. Yeah.
Now, the court of the Gentiles, how does that relate to this inscription?
So that would be outside the actual temple. So there's this Temple Mount that you can come up and go into the sort of the courtyard, the portico, but you couldn't come into the temple itself. So here's a reconstruction of the Temple Mount.
Was that sort of like how they had like a women's gate type of thing?
Yeah. So out here, way out here, you could come in as a Gentile, but like, but you couldn't come into the actual temple itself, like a few steps to go into the temple, because it would be violating this. So this is the courtyard where the Gentile could come into if you wished. You have your purification baths out here, altars and so on. So yeah, it's a massive complex. Let's take a brief gambit. So the temple is in Jerusalem. This is the center of a Jewish religious life. During this period, people were certainly coming to Jerusalem several times a year to fulfill their obligations for feasts, annual feasts, right? So this is all the things we learn about in the book of Leviticus and Numbers. They were carrying out with adaptations that you can read in other books that were written since then, and like jubilees and so on. And they were important, and it was a huge, massive complex with and a center of economy within Jerusalem, which creates the problem that Jesus addressed when he came to this temple, which is like the temple had its own coinage, like we've seen, and you couldn't pay your tithes to the temple with a Roman coin. That would be gross. So you'd have to exchange your money, Roman coin, to temple coin. And since they had a monopoly on temple coin, they were charging huge interest rates or exchange rates, basically, for that. Same thing for the sacrificial animals. If you brought your own sacrificial animal, great. But if you were traveling a long distance, like from Galilee, and you didn't want to bring a herd with you, or some doves, then you could buy them at the temple, but they were treating them like every baseball stadium treats the American hot dog. You
Only priced and not that good.
yeah, exactly. Well, they had to be perfect, but they were definitely overpriced. So, Regina.
Yeah, I just can't help but think of the similarity that has gone through, 2,000 years as far as entrance to the temple goes. This past week, when I work in the morning, I, listen or, to music or podcast or whatever. But this week I watched on YouTube a bunch of Jewish tour guides tour the Temple Mount. And I was just so struck at, the guards with guns and, moving people along. And, you look at the guards and I can almost feel in their hearts saying, please, everyone behave, just keep moving along. I don't want any trouble. I mean, it's definitely worth watching if you've never watched it before.
Very good. Yeah, it's a very tense situation there at the Temple Mount. It's a situation that's unimaginable here in the U.S. I think, having been there too, you see here, there's tensions between Palestinians and Israelis, and the Palestinians legally operate part of Jerusalem. Right? So that's like, it's hard to imagine, walking around in your most important city and having your worst enemy sort of operate part of it.
Yeah.
Of course, that's very tense. Then for Palestinians, I'm not even giving a political perspective there. I'm just saying, like, that's a tense situation by its very
tense. It's incredibly tense.
Yeah.
I just have one other question. The ritual baths at this point, have they taken on the same meaning as the mikveh that you read about later? Yeah.
Yeah, they're mikvahs, 100%.
Okay.
Explain, Regina, what a mikveh is.
Well, as far as I understand it, a mikveh is a place where everyone has to go before they do certain things. And especially interesting is the Essenes, which we read about. They were really into this ritual purity. And it seems like they were in the bath all the time. I mean, and as far as we know that there were separate mikvahs for men and women, and women had to go, especially during their monthly menstrual cycles. And men had to go if they became, for any reason, impure when they were out in the town or whatever. I'm sure I don't have the whole understanding, but.
Yeah, after birth, if anyone, male or female, is near a corpse, if you have some sort of disease,
Touch of dead pig.
for fulfilling a vow. There's lots of reasons, but yeah, in order to, and this is ritual impurity, so it just means you can't go into the temple and make a sacrifice until you've done this ritual purification. So it's not a moral issue. Although if you've sinned and you're bringing a purification sacrifice, you would also purify yourself before coming to offer the purification sacrifice, which functions to also purify the temple. So the way to conceptualize sin and impurity is that it adheres not only to you, but to the temple and to the sanctum. So you have to bring the offering in order to put the blood on those objects that need to be purified, purged, and that's the altar. You can see this for the Day of Atonement, where they sprinkle blood on behalf of the high priest into the Holy of Holies, and then on behalf of the whole people in the realm, the geography of the tent where people could go to offer their offering. So
And also when we got the scapegoat.
the scapegoat carries the impurity and the sins and rebellions off into the wilderness. So there is a sort of metaphysical reality to sin and impurity. It's like a miasma that collects along the sancta and on the person to a degree. So you have to purify yourself and purify the temple.
But I've read, I think it was in this week's reading, that somewhere they said that having your own personal bath was really reserved for the upper class. And I wondered what the other people did.
They're public, shared bath.
Oh, got it.
And these ritual baths would be slightly different, but there were also public baths and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so so thank you. Yeah, that's what a mikvah is. And they were in full swing before this period, and that's what a lot of these would be forms of mikvah. Okay. So speaking of the Essenes, we'll now talk about Qumran. So Qumran, definitely, I think, has to be the most significant archaeological discovery of the 20th century for this region. So this is a site by the Dead Sea here. You can see it due east of Jerusalem by the Red Sea in this little valley. And it's very, very dry, very hard to get fresh water there. And it's surrounded by these little caves. Okay, so they found this because some Bedouin found some manuscripts and these caves and went out and sold them to some folks who didn't really know what they're looking at. And then they went on the black market, and Israel, the state of Israel, this is in the 50s, late 40s and the early 50s is when they got all these manuscripts back. They took a guy, Yadin, who's an archaeologist, and he, representing the state of Israel with all of its financial resources, bid the highest on the black market and got all these Qumran scrolls back to the Israeli Museum, which is good. But and that discovery, so some of those, the biggest ones, they actually recovered that way. The Isaiah scroll, and the community scroll, Damascus document, they got back that way. And then they said, okay, where did these come from? And they went and they found these caves with a bunch of other ones. And most of the ones, most of what was left, not all, but most of what was left in the cave were thousands of tiny fragments, right? Little tiny fragments. I should have put some.
Each of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Dead Sea Scrolls, yeah. And these little fragments either fell apart because of being there for a couple thousand years. It's a slight miracle they survived that long, just because it's so dry that they didn't just crumble. Some people have theorized that perhaps when the Romans destroyed Qumran, they went into these caves and tore them up. I don't know if we ever prove that or not, but that what we do have is just a ton of fragments. That since it took the last Dead Sea Scroll fragment was published in like 2008 or something.
They just found them again this year.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're going to keep finding some, especially on the market. Sometimes they're forgeries. But the last of the original trove were finally published, fairly recently. Because they're trying to, especially for the biblical text, they're taking these fragments, and these scholars, they'll look at like 3 words in Hebrew and figure out where in the Bible that is, right? And they'll like put it there, and it's kind of amazing, the task to line it all up and so on. And so this is your this is the site. Here, this is Judah. We've got Hebron, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and then Qumran, and then Cave 1, Cave 4, Cave 11, right there around it. The caves look like this. Mouse is not working. Okay, so the caves are. I can't see anything. The caves are in those cliffs up around the archaeological site. So once they found the caves and they started digging the area to see what might be there, and they came up with Kibbutz of Qumran, the diagram of this structure, this little city or a village or community is on the right. And it's characterized in some of the walls that are on the left. It's characterized by a large number of ritual pools and a room that that the original archaeologists called a scriptorium. Didn't seem to have much function besides the creation of scrolls in his mind. Big utilitarian room, but they do not find manuscripts or manuscript fragments in that room or anywhere else on the site. So you have a bunch of scrolls up in the caves there, and there's some caves around there, not just all right there. And then you have this site, which has some markings of a closed community, including a room that may have been, I think that's room 8. There, a scriptorium, they call it, okay? But no manuscript evidence there. So this is the influence. Yeah.
Connect the community to the scrolls.
There's nothing to connect
except proximity.
Except proximity to the caves where the scrolls are there. Yeah. And then, so if you hadn't found the scrolls right there by the this interesting site. The site is rather interesting. It's not completely usual. Then you may have had a lot of different interpretations than what we have. Right? But we do have scrolls that describe a community, including a community document with certain rules and lots of ritual bathing. You got lots of ritual baths right here. You've got a sort of a monastic style community. Of course, it's an anachronism, but you have some people who are celibate, some people who are married. They talk about having withdrawn from the other Jews. They seem to be connected, though, to other of their group who don't live in this little community, who live elsewhere in Israel. So on all of this level, because the scrolls are there, it matches some of the features of this kind of unique site. The archaeologist who uncovered all this, DeVoe, here, he is on the right. He's a Father DeVoe OP, Dominican priest. And he, an archaeologist and scholar, he went through this and he thought this is a community. It's inhabited from a 135 BCE to sometime after 73 CE. He sees 3 separate periods of occupation. The early community to the earthquake of 31 BCE, where you have a destruction layer caused probably by earthquake. Period 2, from the reign of Archaeology, the destruction at the hands of the Romans at the start of the Jewish war in 68 CE. And then period 3, Roman military occupation until sometime before the end of the century. Of course, period 2 here is the important period for discussion. He also pointed out that the nearby caves which contain the scrolls are related to the settlement at Qumran. That was his thesis, that they are not disconnected, that they are the scrolls of this very community. And he then posited that the site was the home of a Jewish sect known as the Essenes. That the contents of the scrolls often reflect what is known of the Essenes from the ancient Jewish historian Josephus, along with the rules of community life discovered in the community document written by these folks. The Essenes are, of course, a community that focuses on purity and in the form of withdrawal. So they are not a part of the priestly class, Sadducees, and the priests who are wealthy under Rome, control the temple, and are part of the elite. They're not part of the Pharisees, who focus on law and interpretation and teaching and become the sort of basis for eventual rabbinic Judaism. They are concerned with the same kinds of separation that they are, but in a different way. They want to withdraw from the society altogether. So not all of them do that, right? So they're focused on purity in a real intense way, but some of them still live around, as you can see from the Gospels. But some seem to withdraw into the wilderness, as we can see of the site of Qumran.
So would they be like the equivalent to like Hasidic Judaism today, where they like live more traditionally?
Yes, although the only difference there, yeah, actually,
Just as a comparison.
the type of Hasidism that is focused on like messianic, the messianic Hasidim, who have like the Lubavitcher rabbi, and who are awaiting the return of that guy, and who like the mystic miracle working Hasidim that wrote the parables of the Hasidim and so on. Yes, that's kind of what they're like. They're charismatic in a certain way. They're very focused on purity. They're very focused on eschatology. They have a leader. They do things differently. They think they do it better than the Jerusalem temple. So it's not just about tradition. Yeah, it's like it's we've got the truth more so than even the traditional folks do. Yeah, yeah. We don't have an exact parallel in Catholicism. Now, I think they're similar to like the early monastics who were sitting on pillars and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so Qumran predates the period that you're talking about.
Which period?
I thought you said that Qumran predates the period that the scrolls would have been.
Yeah, the site of Qumran. Yeah, there seems
So how do they? So obviously there was a period. Well, I don't guess it depends on how far. Is this community always theorized to be Essene, or is this a community that was taken over by that?
So,
I mean, in other words, if they predate, somebody else was there before, right?
right. So the folks we're talking about are whoever took over in period 2. There was definitely a shift.
So they're actually by excavating that site and actually tell you what the site was during the theoretical Essene period and before.
Yeah.
And there's a distinction between this, so that you can see what was added during that time.
Yeah. Including the ritual baths and the big hall that seems to have been used as a assembly hall. There's no the kitchen is very focused on lots of jars that are, so it's not like a private kitchen, so it's like storage. So you have aspects that seem community ritual focused.
Fit with the description that's in the scrolls of that community.
Yeah, they map onto each other well. And the funny thing is, people have attacked this thesis, right? So, and I'm going to talk about that. But they've attacked it in various ways, both in scholarly ways and in mean ways. There's a book that came out about Defoe that basically accused him of being a fascist, anti-Semite, but she actually wasn't. Most of the time when people get accused of being a fascist, anti-Semite, they are, you know. So, but it turns out, when I first saw it, oh, man. Then I read it, oh, no, actually, this has all been debunked. He wasn't a fascist, anti-Semite. But he, the reading we did from Myers and Chansey, who came out with Yale's Archaeology of the Bible book that we're reading in 2012, you know, synthesizing the most recent and sort of widely accepted archaeological understanding, basically with some slight changes, accepts all of these points that DeVoe threw up here, right? So the consensus is, yeah, okay, his periods are maybe a little off. They want to move one, you know, based on this or that, up to 15 years and up this one up to 20. But their periods are basically right. People agree that it's just too overwhelming, the connections, the architectural layout and the description of the community in the scrolls and just see this of these scenes. It's all too overwhelming. It just feels like this is what it is, right? Some kind of group, if it's not exactly what we call the Essenes, something very similar. The article, the chapter calls them Yahad, the community of the one. There's like probably many different varieties of these going on. So we don't want to go wild and talk about John the Baptist being a Essene and John the Baptist being a Qumran or anything like that. But yeah, basically very similar to, if not identical to, the Essenes. And so DeVoe here, you know, his thesis has stood the test of time in terms of like just purely archaeological arguments. But
It's
people,
the best overlap that has been proposed thus far.
the best, what do you mean?
The best overlap has been proposed so far. So he's overlapping his thing onto to this. Somebody else could put another overlay on.
Well, like,
based
what's
on
the best
thing.
counter argument?
Well, I'm saying there.
Oh, I
beyond
see. That's the best overlap.
the
right?
points.
Yeah.
In other words, his overlay has the most points, common points, in terms of the theory than other people's.
Yeah, exactly. There have been all other alternative proposals. People have thrown up the idea that this was a fort, a villa, a trading post, or maybe a wealthy private resident. People have pointed out that maybe water was, by the way, this is a reconstruction of what it looked like. Maybe water wasn't so hard to get. You have to look and see, this is really due east of Jerusalem on your way to Jordan. This could have been a trading post. Doesn't have a full-fledged city or village. It's not big enough for that, but it could be like a villa where a few wealthy people lived. Although it really doesn't have, people had villas. They were on the coast. You know.
I was going to say, why would he be there?
Yeah, that never made sense to me at all, actually.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's not a.
I mean, a trading post makes somewhat sense because you always want to have
And it
things
was
somewhere
used,
in between.
and it was used as a Roman fort, for sure. So it makes sense too as a military post.
Really?
But, well, right after they destroyed it, after they raised
Well,
it.
the only reason I'm surprised by that is because usually during this period, the Romans would still build small kostra, which is the only reason why I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, well, they built some things there. Once
Oh, okay.
they may have actually built it, but they worked on the site.
Because usually the Romans like building rectangular castra and being uniform about everything.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But my point is just that the location does allow for the fort interpretation, but the architectural features are so, it's just like, it's a fort, why do we have, all these ritual baths in this assembly hall, right?
Same thing with trading posts. Why would you?
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you had a community there and.
Yeah. And then the debate features are like, well, if it wasn't the place, so, okay, so if it was just a fort, or if it was like a community, but the community had its own thing going and they had nothing to do with the scrolls, then how did the scrolls get in the caves? And where do they come from? That becomes the next question. And the answer provided by this guy, Norman Gold. He was a
Battery and stuff was in there too, so it was like, wasn't just the scrolls that were being hidden there.
yeah. There's pottery, and a similar kind of pottery is in the Qumran, found in Qumran and in the caves. So that's clear that there's like similar pottery at Qumran and caves. But you can kind of argue and say that same kind of pottery is also found in Jericho and other places. So who knows? The scrolls were brought there and put into the caves in pottery, but that isn't, they could have taken that pottery to somewhere else. And it's not completely definitive. This guy, Norm Gulp, was a professor of mine. He was at the University of Chicago. I took Qumran Hebrew with him, and he was a lovely man, very, very sweet. He died recently. And he was the biggest proponent of, no, the scrolls had nothing to do with the Qumran community, and they came from Jerusalem. They showed traditional Jewish practice. They're not evidence of like a different kind of group. They were just part of the ongoing stream of Jewish tradition. And they were created by people in the Jerusalem temple, and they were taken to these caves once the Jerusalem started falling to Rome to protect them from Rome. That was his thesis. It was accepted by practically nobody, not even his own students. But yeah.
I mean, you still have to have a reason why there.
Yeah, why there? Well, and his thesis is just like they knew about it, right? They knew it was a good hiding place. That there was a community there. He doesn't think it was a fort exactly. He thinks there was a community there, but that it was maybe the Jerusalem folks, maybe or maybe it was like part of more of a. It wasn't the distinct. It's like the place that people came from Jerusalem. It was back and forth,
Like a large tree.
like a retreat center. Yeah. And he would see it as like their working cooperation. And there's elements that I think would be true. The one thing that if you read that article, the 2012 article, will more than DeVoe does emphasize that, yeah, even this does seem to be a community that conceives of itself as being distinct and distinct from the folks in Jerusalem, but they also have connections to other people like themselves. The Damascus document, the rule of the community is not just envisioning one community, so they're thinking of like other folks. So there may be some permeability here. But Golb's thesis was not accepted widely, and his career suffered as a result. He wasn't as widely regarded a Qumran scholar as his counterpart at New York University, Lawrence Schiffman. Right? So, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because one of the most fascinating chapters for me of grad school was watching this happen. So I like this man very much. His son, Raphael Gold, also liked his father very much, but he got really obsessed with the fact that his father didn't get the proper academic respect it deserved. Didn't get invited to be a keynote speaker at the conferences, didn't get invited to publish and write books and so on. And the guy that got all that glory was Lawrence Schiffman. And so he went and created like 70 sock puppet email accounts and pretended to be Lawrence Schiffman and did all this stuff over the course of years to create this thing where Lawrence Schiffman had both conspired against his father, knew his father was right and hid evidence, and admitted in his own email account that he had done this, right? And a friend of mine got really curious about what's happening on the internet. And my friend like put a pause on grad school. He was at Berkeley. He put a pause on grad school and just basically went internet detective, and then gave all this evidence to the FBI. And the FBI ended up arresting Gold's son, right, and putting him in jail for impersonating Lawrence Schiffman. So it was very sad. I shouldn't laugh. It's just like it was very sad because it hurt Norm very much, right? Of course, it's like, he had nothing to do with it. His son did this on his own account. But it was a bizarre turn of archaeology and biblical studies that can happen. When the stakes aren't low here, but academia, I often feel like the drama is so high because the stakes are so low. It's like, it seems very, very silly to me, some of the stuff that happens. But anyway, archaeology is filled with intrigue and drama and all that. That was when I got to experience firsthand. In any case, legitimate counter proposals haven't won a lot of acceptance because, like Bill said, the thing that makes the most sense of the complete evidence seems to be, we don't have to be extraordinarily skeptical. There are caves right around this thing. They mention a community that has some of these features in the manuscripts. It seems like these people were copying scrolls and there in their community. And I also love that because I think, like we talked about before, there's a presupposition that we need huge state or like massive Jerusalem temple sponsored industry in order to have the creation of a bunch of scrolls. This is why, like, hey, if you don't have a huge apparatus, you're not going to have a bunch of scrolls being copied and so on. I just think that's not true. And I think there probably were even more scrolls being copied in Jerusalem, right, that we don't have because they were burned and withered away. And there are probably thousands and thousands and thousands of scrolls that we'll never find, that are just lost to history because of the nature of the papyrus and so on, and parchment. But here is a little community devoted to the scripture. They're just doing their thing, which is probably fairly common. And we find this trove of more biblical manuscripts exponentially than we've had before, and centuries and centuries and centuries earlier than we had before. And so it feels completely overwhelming. This is why some folks are like, this can't just be this little group of people out in the back skirts, like making all these scrolls. It's got to be the Jerusalem temple.
It's sort of the problem with expectations.
Yeah.
You have this big thought that, these scrolls have to be made by this, giant monastery or something like that. And you just picture it because it's such a giant thing in theology. And then you find out that it was these ants in comparison that were making these things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They had their own production.
I mean, you don't even have to have, it doesn't have to have been productions. I mean, when you got copies of things in a time period, because you can have things happen to them because you make copies. So there's people making copies. So they might have had, a limited number of copies of something. They had somebody there who was capable of making copies, so they made copies.
Yeah,
Just
that's
for the
true.
community, because you'd want more than one in the community.
Yeah, and some of these scrolls may have been, and that's the other thing, like the Great Isaiah scroll is almost a work of art. It's and to copy that, to create that by hand, requires a really highly trained scribe. It's gorgeous, but they may have like that could have been made there, or, maybe something like that is actually brought from Jerusalem. You bought it in Jerusalem, brought it there. Like, you've got to have your copy of the scripture to study, and then they're copying themselves. Those are some of the other manuscripts. So. In any case, that's Qumran, and it is extraordinarily important both for discovering what this community about, giving us a little more sense of the first century, then also providing material archaeologically secure in many cases, not the ones that are bought on the black market, but those that archaeologists discovered from the caves. Evidence of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Every book of the traditional Hebrew Bible was found there, except for the book of Esther that we did last week, which is also the only book in the Bible that does not mention the name of God. And the community scroll does not mention observing Purim, so that may have just been like a religious distinction on their part, or it could have been a coincidence. But in any case, you got the Bible. It's in a material form, and that is helpful because you think like, okay, we've had very careful copying happen down to the centuries. Nonetheless, the earliest complete manuscript of the entire Hebrew Bible is medieval, right? So we're dealing with the Iron Age text, Persian period text, in a copy that's medieval. So some cuneiform friends would, actually, this is even a joke. I had a new grad student who's seeing if they're going to come to Chicago and they do cuneiform stuff. And they actually have the ancient cuneiform tablets. And he said, so what do you study? I said, Hebrew Bible. And he said, oh, so you're medievalist, I said, no, jerk. We got Qumran. So anyway, this is, and what's fascinating about that is that you can see the scribal changes. You can see like, okay, here's the oldest Greek translation we have of this particular text, 1 Samuel 1. Here's the oldest Latin. Here's the oldest Hebrew of the Masoretic text, the medieval Jewish scribes tradition. Then here's a Qumran manuscript with this passage. And you can compare them, see the slight differences, see the overwhelming similarity, and start to see what happened with this text over time. So that's the oldest. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Qumran manuscripts are by centuries the oldest material form of the Bible we have. Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break and come back and talk some more. It is 7:26, so we'll come back at 7:40.
I told you I was going to leave about 8. I'm just going to leave now.
Beautiful. Okay, no problem at all.
But with the Hebrew Bible, always get these internet fights over, biblical translations, and they go, well, I'm doing it from the Hebrew Bible or the Hebrew translation. I go, that's not like the original translation. What do you mean it's a medieval? Yeah, but our oldest translation of Hebrew is from the medieval period. It's not like it was a scribe sitting there translating it in Hebrew in the Old Temple.
What do you mean?
No, like what I mean, like
The modern Hebrew translation.
yeah, the modern Hebrew translation. It's not like the medieval scribe is sitting there in the second temple.
Not a time period.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hebrew translation.
Like you can't just hold it up on high to Hebrew translation.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is more accurate?
Yeah. Because I tell them that, I sometimes read the Bible in Latin. And they go, well, that wasn't transcribed until like later on. I go, so it's the Hebrew version.
Well, there is a distinction there. The Hebrew is copied, not translated, whereas the Latin is a translation.
From Greek, from the translation of Greek,
From
the
Hebrew.
translation of Hebrew, right?
Jerome translated from the Hebrew.
Oh, he translated from
Yeah,
the Hebrew?
yeah.
That's an argument I always hear. I hear it's a translation of the translation.
Jerome uses for every single, he's a text critic, so for every single thing he translates, he reads the Greek and the Hebrew.
Well, now I have another argument.
Yeah.
No, actually, Jerome translated from Hebrew out to Greek.
But Jerome would argue back at you and say you got, but it's good to review.
It's good to read the Hebrew, but it's just like, I prefer reading the translation. My translation's wrong. And I'm like, well, your King James version is wrong because they replaced certain words with other words.
Yeah.
It's like when somebody was saying, well, right here in the Bible, it says the Jesus are brothers. And I'm like, well, the Jews didn't have a word for cousin.
Right.
So
Right.
when it's translated into Greek, the Greek had a word for cousin, but they're hearing brother and sister.
I don't know, it's just
Right.
ridiculous.
Right.
It is. I don't know who.
Thank you for the class, Professor.
Yeah, hey, wonderful to meet you. Best of luck.
Might have another class with you students. Up with Father Baker.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yes. Yes. Happy discernment.
Have a good one. Take care.
It's a great class, thank you.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. I was happy to have you back again.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I loved the last one too.
It's
I've
good.
never taken classes like it. I always wanted to.
Yeah.
I just never had an opportunity. Wow.
Yeah, I'm glad we do this, you know, that the audit thing is
Yeah.
the free audit, and then it's good to have people come in with who are engaged and
Yeah.
who don't need a degree, you know.
Yeah, right. But yeah,
there
I mean,
anything
you
being
do a
done
great
up
job too. Integrating everybody in the class. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. Yeah.
Is there anything being done up here?
In the fall, yeah, Lisa Lacona is teaching one of her 2 courses in Buffalo. I don't remember which one it is. Let's see. It'll be one that's in the sequence for first-year deacon, so it's definitely.
Oh.
She's the new Nancy. She's doing all Nancy's.
Oh, okay.
courses. I guess did you have Nancy?
I had Nancy, for my second last semester
Right.
for spirituality.
Yeah, I'm doing John and Old Testament.
But that's
That's in Rochester. It'll be on Zoom too. And
we
then-
never had any job.
What's that?
We never had any job.
Oh yeah, this is an elective. It's an elective. I pitched it. Usually we do Pauline literature, which I did last fall, but
No, I mean, it's a deficiency for our curriculum.
oh yeah.
We don't have, do you have any our deacons in there? Or you don't
Not
know
at the
yet?
moment. No. It's an elective. It's I have a Buffalo lay student in it, but I don't have any teachers in it. It is, but it's going to be a slow read. We're going to do patristic, medieval, and modern commentators on every chapter of John, and then we'll hit the epistles on Wednesday week. So it's going to be a slow read, which I'm really looking forward to. And
What day is it?
Thursdays. And Lisa is doing discernment in Rochester, spiritual formation.
Oh.
Yeah. I'll be here again in the spring for moral theology. Also, I'm sure you've already taken this off, but
That's always interesting.
yeah, that'll be, you can't take the same moral theology class twice.
Okay. Usually I had more theology class once. We had, no, it wasn't bad, but we had, I mean, the content wasn't bad, but there really wasn't any teaching in class. We got the book read back to us during class.
Yeah. So
if you did the reading before class, when you're sitting in class, you just like, yeah, you know what I did? I surfed the internet and read our journal articles during class, and I sat off center. So I was just off of his peripheral vision.
Oh, oh,
As opposed to a couple of buddies who sat in front of them. And they couldn't do anything. So. And I kind of have an ear open and I'd be reading. And I'd find something that was connecting.
all right.
But he didn't like questions either. Yeah.
That seems like a bad way to go.
And nobody else liked me asking questions. Because it just extended the class.
Oh, yeah, sure. Right, that's
So if I asked a question and took 10 minutes of time up, we finish at 9:10.
Oh, I see what you're saying, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a pretty big weight on you when you want to ask a question. To say, don't do that.
I that. Sometimes I teach a class goes till 7 to 10.
You know what the best part of that whole class was? Our oral midterm.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I spent 40 minutes talking to them the oral midterm. Everybody else spent like 5 or 10.
Oh, my gosh.
But I mean, that is what he should have been doing in class.
Right, right. Seems like, right, especially that kind of
The
class.
discussion he had with me during that midterm would have been perfect in class.
Right,
But
yeah.
Well, without disparaging names, our
Oh.
father who taught more theology at Christ the King.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
I have no idea.
Definitely know what's up.
I have no context for this.
What?
Yeah, you,
I'm like completely impervious to this discussion. Because, yeah, I don't know these people at all. Like,
So no reason to say anything.
right.
I met and really enjoy Eric Mabry at a conference
Oh, yeah.
in the fall of 2019. And
Did you come to one of the Catholics?
I did.
Oh,
but
cool.
This was a conference, actually, the major conference that SBL AER is. It's like every religion professor in the country goes to. It's thousands of people. And I just happened to go to his paper, which I wouldn't normally even go. I usually go to Bible and archaeology stuff. And he was giving a paper on Christology or something. I never go to that stuff because it's not my field. And at the academic conference, I'm not going to go get overwhelmed by someone doing this. But I for some reason I was like, that looks really interesting. So I went and I struck up a conversation with him. We went out to dinner together, and I really enjoyed him, exchanging emails. And then he really talked about how much he liked Christ the King and that area. And I was like, I'd love to teach in a school like that. That'd be really cool. It's like a good fit. And then he invited me for the conference in spring. I guess that was spring 2020.
Okay.
No, it
Oh, no,
happened.
they had it.
They had it. It was right as the school was closing.
Yeah.
But then I got the interview for St. Bernard's the week of that conference. So I flew up here, interviewed at St. Bernard's, went to the conference, talked to Eric. Was really mad at that point, and then flew home. So
Where did he end up?
Maryland. He's at the big seminary there.
Yeah.
He landed well.
Yeah.
He's great. Very, very smart guy. Brian's at Marquette.
Brian went, yeah, and that's where he wanted to go, so he landed well. His is a little more tenuous. There are, I think, some sort of a grant that doesn't have permanent status, but when you're there, and they're looking for new hires, and you have everybody.
That's where he came from.
Right. It's where his mentor is.
I also had, Father Mac. He was in Rochester. He was in Rochester last year. So I had dinner with him. He's good. He's moved. Now he just moved to.
He just got a new position.
I mean,
Milwaukee.
Yeah. Yeah, but he had his transplant, and then he recovered very well from it.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, it's a seminary in Michigan.
What's that?
Seminary in Michigan.
Wisconsin, right outside of
Wisconsin.
Milwaukee. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he's I didn't know him very well at all. I just, met him a bit.
I actually know him, but I never took a class from him. Because he was sick when we were there most of the time. At the level he was at, we wouldn't have gotten to him until later. So. But he actually is was good friends with a family friend of a friend of mine.
Very cool.
I used to see him at wine tastings and dinners.
He was working on his doctorate and he was teaching us at Christ the King Seminary. And then, can you hear me or not?
Yeah.
Okay. And then he stopped doing his doctorate when he got sick. And now after he got his transplant, he has moved and he's doing great.
Good. Yeah, I had dinner with him pretty recently. And he looked, I met him only when he was really sick. So I was kind of shocked when I saw him. I was like, oh man. Like
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got 2 minutes.
So the seminary up for sale. Or this stuff?
It's in the bankruptcy pot.
Okay.
They've rejected resales now. So there are 3 attempts to sell it. So it's gonna, I mean, they're looking for the reason they've done it is because it's the value's more. And the value is in leveling it and putting multi-million-dollar houses on there. So, I mean, I don't think they're gonna be able to escape that. So. I'm trying to keep it sort of intact and then, figure it out. What's that gonna happen? The last one wasn't even academic. It was for like a nursing facility type of homes. But they would, still use other things. So it wasn't going to be leveled. But, it got rejected too because the appraisals are, and just the property value is just way over. I think the only hope is that that will fetch enough to keep this building out. Because every time they go back, that's not enough. We don't have any more. Go find it. Adjournment 3 months later. Nope, it's not enough.
Okay. All right. Let's okay. We are back in action for our last period of our class. I'd like to pick up, we talked a little about Qumran. I'd like to pick up with the Essenes and the Essene Gate. Okay, so for this particular portion, though, I'd like to ask Regina, who sent me these photos, to talk to us about the Essene Gate.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna kill you.
Sorry, Regina.
Well, I can't, I'll tell you what I know about it. So as you can see, it was built, there were a number of things built on top of it. And I really like these pictures because being totally unfamiliar with archaeology, I could not envision how these stratigraphy layers exist. And I think these pictures that just really show it in a way awesome sense. On the far left, the two stones on the bottom are the sill of the Essene Gate. And you can see above it how many things were built on top of it. But anyway, there was a king, and you'll have to help me out here, Dr. Huff. There was a king I read that had a special kind of sympathy for the Essenes and allowed them to build the gate into the already existing wall around Jerusalem. And the gate, where the Essene structure was found, and up to the gate is really quite a climb. I mean, it's a very steep hill. And it's thought, at least I read somewhere, that the thought was that there were actually Essenes living inside Jerusalem as well. And so there was a lot of foot traffic back and forth between where their proposed living area was and the inside of Jerusalem. And there was a ritual bath right outside the gate that the Essenes used before they went inside. And that's the extent of my knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much. Great. So Josephus describes this gate as part of the wall here of the Herodian period, and we called it the Gate of the Essenes. Right? So this is where it gets its name, and what exactly that meant and how that would play out in terms of how the Essenes came into the city or so on is unclear, but they this is the gate they're referring to, yeah, and this is part of the gate into Jerusalem, ritual bath gate, and then yeah, Regina's pointing out the stratigraphy, very helpful. You can really clearly see the difference in various parts of the construction. And very good, thank you. And and that's an important point for the way Josephus portrays the Essenes, the way the Gospels portray the Essenes, and the way that the Qumran community organizes itself out in the desert. It's important to think that, okay, this is a group, we can't sort of nail down exactly what they're doing if the Qumran community is even best described as Essenes, but they do seem to have, it seems to be sort of a movement where you have the Essenes, so described, as a sort of theological, social, and ideological movement where they're hoping for a Messiah. They're thinking of their own community as being especially important in the restoration of Israel, and they are looking to bring that to their own separatist kind of ways. They're certainly part of a long tradition. The whole movement of eschatology, particularly within Jews that lived still in Judah, was informed by people withdrawing from what they considered to be worldliness and picturing the heavens showing the real truth of the world, right? So they don't like accommodation, whether it's Jews who are becoming Hellenized under Greek rule, or a few hundred years later, Jews who are capitulating to the Roman rule in various ways, whether they're collecting taxes for them, or just getting wealthy off them, even in their religious service. The priests were not Roman and resisted the Romans, but they also did pretty well under the system. So the Essenes were, withdrawing from that, but they were part of the society as well. Here's your graph, Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. We've got the lower city, the upper city, called Zion. We've got the sort of the gate of the Essenes, question mark, that's what we just looked at. You've got the city wall going all the way around. You've got the Temple Mount is enormous, I hope you can see. And various parts of the city here. So this is Jerusalem as Jesus would have encountered it. To the right is a fascinating archaeological discovery up in Galilee. This is a fishing boat. And it was preserved, they found it, they brought it out, and this is an actual fishing boat discovered from the first centuries. This is a rare find. And this is the kind of boat that you can picture Jesus and the disciples going on. Enough room in this boat for 12, 15 people, they say. To me, it looks like that would be a real tight ride, but that's what they say. And a little where you put the nets and stuff, there's a place where you can go down and sleep, which accords with the gospel story with Jesus in front of the boat. We've got various reconstructions here to look at. Jerusalem's with Herod's Temple Mount. These are all from the textbook. I'm putting up here in case you didn't have a chance to look at them. But we're entering a period where there's a lot of information known. You've got a pretty clear understanding of it, and it's right before everything gets destroyed. So we can kind of go back to this clear destruction level and see, okay, here's the way things were up to 70 AD. Jesus is roaming around from, 2 to 3, probably, or 0, we might say, up to 33 AD. The early Christianity comes after that, and the whole thing gets destroyed at 70 AD. That's the Bar Kokhba, or no, that Bar Kokhba was later, I'm sorry. That's the Fundistan. That's the move. That's when Rome comes and says, enough with the rebellions in Jerusalem. We destroy Jerusalem and much of surrounding area. So that's when we've got a lot of things that aren't really used much after that. So you have clear sort of spaces for knowing everything. The Gospels present a view of first century Palestine and Judah that's very coherent. If you look at the details in the gospel narratives, you look at the archaeological evidence, it's coherent within that world. Of course, there is no material difference between Jews and this is Caesarea Maritime, by the way. This is Jerusalem, another sort of reconstruction of what Jerusalem would look like. It's not so different from what it looks like right now, honestly, including the coverings going down these alleyways. If you go to Jerusalem, you'll see that now. Caesarea Maritime here, and this is Tiberias on the left. This is the temple looking out onto the court, and this is like a wealthy priest's home. Sometimes this is archaeological discovery, sometimes called Caiaphas' house. And here's one of the sites uncovered. And so Jesus and the Christians, the early Christians, don't leave any archaeological evidence to speak of. There's no difference between Jewish and Christian material culture for a long time until, really much later there. And there's some sort of attempts that the chapter describes at trying to trace and trying to find Jewish Christian culture. This is distinct from later Greek Christian culture or Latin Christian culture, Byzantine Christian culture in material artifacts. There's some scant things, there's some things, but there's not a lot that you can point to sort of distinguish early Christian stuff. But on the other hand, there is a remarkable coherence between the details of the text and what we know from archaeology. So it's not the case that we have a lot of extremely fanciful stuff going on in the Gospels, except for, the miracles and the resurrection. But in terms of like the daily life of versus Palestine, very, very convincing. That is, and the miracles would not be archaeologically examinable. Right? So One thing that people used to point to as a reason why John is late and not actually written by someone who knows very much about Jerusalem is this passage, John 5:2-9. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Beth Zatha, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Okay, so people used to say, okay, there is no pool here. There's nothing by the sheep gate that we know about. It's impossible. It's ludicrous. We could have 5 porticos and 5 walls around a pool. What are we talking about? How could this happen? Well, eventually they dug up just such this pool here on the left. We have 2 large ritual baths separated by a wall, which then ends up creating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 porticos. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 porticos. Does that make sense? So this is, of course, on the left is the actual site. On the right is a reconstruction. But this looks to be the actual pool that is described in John. And so that was like a big one that people were pretty sure that John was wrong about, and then he wasn't. So that's interesting. That's pretty great. So then there's the other, there's other evidence. This is the ossuary of Caiaphas here on the left. Ossuaries are very common. So we have a ton of ossuaries that are found in the from this period, and they are, ossuaries are boxes where you put bones. So you bury someone, in these things, their bones in them, and you describe them, put them in family tomb, move them around. Yeah, they move from place to place, secondary burials and so on. And this,
So you wouldn't disturb, you never disturb that ossuary is mobile, so you don't ever disturb the bones once they're put in there.
yeah,
You just move the ossuary.
yeah, exactly. This has been going on for centuries. Very common Jewish burial practice. In fact, Qumran is unique because Qumran does not use this. And they don't bury people in families. This is another way that recent archaeologists have argued that against Norm Gold, my beloved teacher, and other people, that Qumran is distinct from Jerusalem because they have a completely different burial practice from anyone else in Jerusalem. And their burial practice, they don't bury people in families, they bury them as individuals, and they don't use ossuaries. And when you get a group, a charismatic group with some cult-like features that's not connected, you're not going to join it with your family, I shouldn't say cult-like. Even if think of it as a monastery, right? My spiritual director died last fall. He's only in his 60s, but really beautiful man, Jesuit priest. He's buried with a bunch of Jesuit priests in a cemetery in Chicago, right? He's not buried with his family. That's what Qumran is kind of like that for the individual burials, not family burials. Anyway, the ossuaries are used very commonly. There's tons and tons and tons of them from the 1st century Jerusalem. This seems to be Caiaphas's. It's inscribed practice of the high priest, and that's cool. Pilate, there's this inscription that mentions Pilate on the right. There's some coins that are Pilate coins, so he's here established historically. There will always be names of people known from the Gospels and the book of Acts discovered in these boxes. And every 10 years from here on until we die, there will be such discoveries, and they'll make the news, right? Because they're going to be like sexy, right? But of course, it turns out that Mary is the most common name. Over 50% of all women in the first century Palestine were named some form of Mary. Yeah. And Jesus, extremely common name. That's why he's Jesus of Nazareth, right? James, extremely common name. All these are very, very common names. I mean, even in the New Testament, you got James, the brother of Jesus, James, the apostle, James, there's lots of,
All the Marys.
and a bunch of Marys right in the Gospels. Yeah, exactly. Which Mary isn't. So you're going to find there have been even several Jesus Bar Joseph things found, right, at ossuaries, and then people get very worked up because they'll do statistical analyses and so on. But Joseph, extremely common name. Jesus is an extremely common name. So we have big attempts to try to say this has to be this or whatever. The most convincing one is James Bar Joseph Jesus, right? James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, Aramaic. James Ossuary. This was a big deal, came out in 2005. And big press, lots of happiness. We've discovered James the Great, as he's called, his bones. And however, that one turned out to be a forgery based on the patina and some parts of the Aramaic script being identical to other things that have already been published, and various scientific analysis of the ossuary. It seemed like this is a forgery. Too good to be true. Usually when it's too good to be true, it's not true, right? Yeah, actually, yeah. Definitely a forgery. So that's unfortunate. But the one we're going to talk about as a group is the one I had you read about. There's a documentary filmmaker that discovered a family tomb with a bunch of ossuaries in it, and found one with Jesus, maybe Jesus on it, found one with the name of Mary on it, and then posited that the James ossuary that's a forgery was taken from this because Israel lost one of the ossuaries. So made a documentary film saying conclusive evidence Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, and they then had they were buried together in this family tomb with James, his brother. So lots of things wrong with that. The commonness of names, the fact it was in Jerusalem when Jesus was from Galilee, the fact that couldn't really establish any sort of relationship between a Mary and a Jesus just because there's ossuaries there. Well, why not his mom, right? So, designed to be maximally attention getting and minimally cautious. But nonetheless, we decided to read some articles about this. Myers, who wrote the textbook that we're reading, did a whole series of posts about this or articles about this for VAR, and that's what I had you read. So I'd like to do a little discussion and summary of the reading as we've done before. There are several pieces within this one piece, and so let me pull that up. And I'll have those who've read it do some summaries, but if you all want to pull it up on your computers, you can feel free. It's under Canvas on week 7 readings, and then the reading itself is Myers et al. Forum, the Talipot Jesus Family Tomb in EA, here's the archaeology. I said VAR. That's wrong with that. And so I'm going to have your typical three groups. And here in the room, I'm going to have you do the overview article and the first subsequent one by Shannon Gibson to give the overview. On the group two, I want you to look at the article on statistics and inscriptions. So that's Sham and Ralston. And group three, I'm going to have you do what's remained after that. Mary Magdalene has left the room. Stephen J. Fun and the one following. Okay, all clear? So just give a little discussion, take a look at it, very short pieces, and then we'll come back and discuss them. So I'm gonna put you guys in 2 rooms.
Everything that you're talking about is from the Myers and Chansey article.
We're trying to find.
It's from Myers et al.
No.
From the second article on the reading. You got it?
Just don't know which part are we reading?
The first two.
Help with Jesus standard.
Yeah. And did you have a chance to read that? You did. Okay. Okay. So no one here's read it yet. You just take a glance at the first one. Yeah. Just take a glance at the first one. I don't want to be reading that in the class, but it's easy reading. I'll check the other two. I'm not actually.
No, I'm in populating and Canvas. I can't. They changed the thing on here. What is it?
Up in the right corner, the student resource.
Oh, student resources. Oh, okay. I have to, I gotta change my bookmark. Because it's, where it used to be, it's not right.
Okay. It's fine if you guys check. So I don't mean to have you all go. If you take a scan, whatever rules they think. Not doing it, right? All right. One of them. I think we're going to take a look at the laws.
Okay.
Oh wait, here's one. Never mind. Here's one.
Let's meet oriented.
Right.
Oh.
I actually never did.
Oh, you never do.
That's probably why he keeps asking me to do it. I've never done the orientation. Which other movie was
The very first one.
Mary's Enchanting Chapter 4?
No, it's the one article below.
Mary's Forum.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then when they end up, there's a bunch of articles.
Oh, okay.
All right. All right. All right. Okay, what do we think, room one, from the Zoom? What do you have to share with us? Your You're wandering down the family tomb.
In our group, not everybody read the article in its entirety, myself included, but I read pages 116 to 121, which gave me the gist of what happened, and that there was a press conference, I think it was 1996, where the CEO of Discovery Channel and a film producer, a couple people had a press conference where they came out with a book and a movie, documentary film, and this press conference all at the same time, saying that they were sure that the ossuary had that they had researched contained the remains of Jesus and also his wife, what they called Mary Magdalene, his wife, and even a son. And so as we scratch the surface looking at the information, you can see right away that it all doesn't add up. And the discovery was made because there was construction in the area, in a suburb outside of Jerusalem, a couple kilometers out. And it was approaching the Sabbath, so they couldn't do an extensive research of what they had found. So they did they gathered up what they could, and then they posted a security guard there. And the guard did not do a very good job of watching the place, because children came from the neighborhood and they started playing with the bones and messing around with the skulls and everything, mixing them up. And so one of the parents chastised them and put the remains in a plastic bag and handed them over to the antiquities department in Israel a couple days later. Then, to make things worse, the person in charge of handling the research for the Israeli museum, he passed away suddenly, and he did not take any kind of good notes like he was supposed to. So they were really left with very little information. So you have evidence that was all tampered with, a lack of info of the original site, what was found, but they still tried to continue with it. And there's just a lot of things that didn't add up. You know, they had, on the day of the press conference, a couple of archaeologists, I think one of them was a professor, and they actually didn't believe that this contained the bones of Jesus, or the bones of his wife and son, you know, like he even had a wife and son, but they just denied the whole thing, that it's most likely not true. And the ossuary was purchased from a gentleman in 1978. Well, I think he actually acquired it in 78, and he's under investigation right now. I think he was actually already arrested for antiquities fraud. So this whole thing just is not very legitimate. It's you know, quite a false thing that they put together. And one last thing, that they archaeologists would typically take their findings and release it to colleagues and ask for feedback.
Right.
And what they did in this case is they just came out of the gate like, this is the truth. And so you know, and it was almost like a money-making scheme, that all on the same day, the press conference at the New York City Library, the documentary film from Discovery Channel, and the book all released. It doesn't have any feel of sound archaeology.
Excellent, thank you, Jimmy. Yeah, this is just a couple notes. It was 2007, 2007. And yeah, so, and some of that was from the James Washbury, the guy that got it from 78. This, and you're right, so we have here, what do we have? We've got an ossuary, several ossuaries found together. One Yeshua bar Yosef, one Mary, and one Mariamne, and then a Yehuda, son of Yeshua. Then a Maria, Matthew, and a Yosef, who they say might have been a friend and a brother. So that's what we got. We got ossuaries in a tomb. Yesu bar Yosef, Maria, Mary, or Martha, and then Mariamne, and Yehuda, son of Yeshua, and Matthia, and Yosef. Okay, so we got a tomb, we got some names. Of course, it's tantalizing. You know, we love to have Yeshua bar Yosef and then Yehuda bar Yeshua and Vola, and we got a couple of Marys. One can be mom, one can be Mary Magdalene. And we've got Jesus's family. He's got a son with Mary Magdalene, just like we've been positing for, you know, since the Da Vinci Code. It's so it's tantalizing, but there are some problems with it as a thesis. Regina, what did your group have to say about this whole show?
We talked about the fact that there wasn't even agreement on how the names were written. That whether it was one name or two, especially when it came to Mary. And also that there were a lot of assumptions made that they based their whole argument on, that the evidence really didn't support the assumptions, like the DNA evidence. It didn't prove anything, essentially. It didn't prove any kind of relationship. And someone pick up from there.
Yeah, there was the, it was a question of whether there was Mary Amne, I think, was, and Mara, and so it's a question of whether that means Mary called Mary Amne, or if it's two people. And then the DNA, the idea of that was that because they were buried together in the same family tomb, but they weren't, the man and the woman, there wasn't a connection from a mother in the DNA, but so there was the hypothesis that it was a husband and wife, but it could have been a it could have been any other kind of relationship, in-laws, or someone, a brother and a sister from different mothers.
Yep. Good. Thanks for bringing up the DNA, because this is a way to sort of give, this is instant scientific credibility, you can say, for a DNA test, right? But what are you testing? Okay, you determined that, as best you can from the kind of DNA that they were able to get from the bones, that the bones from the Miriam ossuary, the Mariamne ossuary, and the bones from the Yeshua ossuary are not familial. Not familial. Vola, they must have been married, right? You know, like, but there's a lot of other possibilities, you know. And then that gives Jesus a wife. Of course, we can't establish that Maria wasn't. There's no establishment for what Maria was, or the others, or anything like that.
It's all in isolation.
Yeah.
So you found a husband, wife, and child.
What is the?
And you get a genetic match that says, yeah, this one doesn't have any connection to this one, and they both have a connection to this one. Well, yeah, that's what you would expect. From those
Yeah.
1,002, right?
Right. But
So-
but you don't even find, actually, we don't even have that. If we
Well,
did-
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it doesn't get you much farther.
Yeah,
Did I read it correctly that it does say that they confirmed that those various sites was from that time period, the first century up to 70s?
yeah. Mhm.
So we know it's plausible from the time.
Plausible for the time period, names are right, location is wrong. Jerusalem wasn't where they lived,
Yeah.
but,
Or could it be like where, we can make the argument where James went back there, obviously.
yeah,
Maybe the family went back there and
yeah, yeah, perhaps like, they took up Jesus' body from the tomb and did a secondary burial in the ossuary, and the Jesus movement is happening in Jerusalem, and then they like buried him with Mary.
although the movement was kind of based on the resurrection. So why would they make a public tomb?
But yeah, family tomb, right, yeah.
Right, so I mean,
yeah.
if it's the whole movement. at that point,
And if you've got a family tomb where everyone's getting buried and he's got a widow and a son after his crucifixion, I think that would feature, right? There's nothing the thing about it is that people want to create a scandal for Jesus that he had a wife and kid when it wouldn't have been a scandal. For him to marry Mary Magdalene and have a child, right? That would have been very normal, right? So there's nothing because they're not thinking in terms of like, the first Christians aren't thinking about Nicene Christology, right? Or like the
Yeah.
promise of God having a wife or something. There's
Yeah.
like, if Jesus had a wife and a kid, they would have been like, and his widow is here and she's wonderful. It's not a big deal. In any case, so we have some loosely connected things, but we can't know for sure what the familial relationships would have been for all these people in this tomb. And of course, we could have, Matthew could be the husband of Mary, of either of the Marys, right? Mary could have been a daughter of Yahushua. There's just like a lot of, well, I guess the DNA rules that out, but there's a lot of different possibilities based on what's in there. We want to see it because of the names that match on to the story they're trying to tell, but we can't just sort of do that. I also find it really interesting that, if not particularly convincing for familial relationship, that whatever you do with Mary Amenu Mara, whether you take it as a chi or not, as Ben argues, it's Greek, right? So you've got a bunch of Aramaic folks, and then Mary Magdalene is written in Greek. So I don't know what that means, but to me, it doesn't mean that
they're not part of the Greek culture.
right. Mary Magdalene isn't particularly Greco in the New Testament. I mean, who knows if this was, I'm going to posit this was, but again, it doesn't match anything but the modern need to sort of write off the Christian story. So
It's kind of mind-blowing that something so huge as this, the scholars would have rushed to the television.
what was that?
It's a little mind-blowing to me that with something as huge as this, that the scholars or whoever they were would have rushed to publication and to TV.
Yeah, well, they were.
I don't think that's a surprise.
They got yeah.
Pontificating about coronavirus now.
They got very excited about the theory. But yeah, it was they were amateurish about it in terms of how it would have been far more convincing if they had done less certainty, as Jamie was saying. Like,
Yeah.
we've just proven something within us, the world. Whereas, right, you remember the article with Eilat Nazar, who thought she was going to find
Exactly. Exactly,
And
yeah,
what did she do? She
yeah.
refused to say that's what she thought she was gonna find. She
Right.
invited every archaeologist who wanted to come watch the work, come watch it. She
Right.
published it and invited people to argue with the publication. She invited them back to it. You know, like, there's a way you do these things, right? She thinks she's finding something phenomenal, so she wants to be as careful and cautious as possible. Exactly opposite of what we did here. Exactly opposite of what happened with the James ossuary. And so, yeah, there's sensationalism. And then when you've got the thesis, then you start ignoring the problems with it, right, which are pretty glaring. Is it possible? Is it possible that we found here, you know, Jesus' family, and we've just uncovered the fiction behind, you know, this 2,000 years that we've been doing? No, it's possible, but there's actually like a dozen or so ossuaries with Yehoshua Bar Yosef on it.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to find an ossuary with Yehoshua Bar Yosef on it, you got your pick, you know. So
You know,
you
the
can't.
first
pick
thing
one.
I thought of,
What's the
the
best
first,
grave of Jesus, right? Maybe this one because there's some Marys, but man, Marys are everywhere. We can find Marys all over. Right? So once you start looking at the whole corpus,
And there was no James. That was, right?
no James.
That was forgery. So all
Forgery.
we have is Jesus and Mary.
Mary and this other Mary, right? So yeah. Sorry, Regina. Go ahead.
oh no, the first thing I thought of when I read this article, back in the 90s, the early 90s, I believe, a British medical researcher came out with a study, and he claimed that the MMR vaccine caused autism. I don't know if you remember that that at all, but a couple of years later, it was shown that his methodologies were just wrong. They weren't right, and it's taken decades. We're still undoing that in medicine. We're still undoing that.
Yeah, it's the thing. That's the thing. Sometimes, you know, the point is when you're doing a press release with veiled ossuaries and unveiling them on television and releasing in movie form and a popular book. Yeah, you're not trying to sort of build a scholarly consensus and then move to a public discussion of it. You're going straight to the New York Times. Scholarship that's released straight to the New York Times is usually somewhat suspect. You know, we had this recently in the field. I should have done a whole thing on this. I didn't. I'm sorry. There's a new thesis about an old forgery that a guy at Harvard has decided is the earliest copy of Deuteronomy. It wasn't a forgery, and he did a rapid publication of it via an academic press, gathered a forum at Harvard, at the law school, not at the milk department, because he was like his dad is Dershowitz. No, is that right?
Elton Dershowitz.
Yeah. His uncle is Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz. So he's got connections. He's a connected man. He had a special, very sexy forum at Harvard Law School, and one of my advisors went to it. I was like slightly disappointed with them. Anyway, so they had a hush hush conference by invitation only, secret conference about this thing, and then it got released straight to the New York Times. He's had a whole argument about how he's discovered the earliest version of Deuteronomy, and now everyone's scrambling to be like, this is insane, but which it is. But that's that in archaeology and in archaeology in the Bible, a lot of it is actually dealing with this kind of stuff, right? Because once that hits the media, once you read about it in the New York Times, I didn't know about this because I wasn't invited to the very luxurious special meeting at Harvard about it. And then, the New York Times article got out, and I had people from every corner of my life who've never asked me a single question about the Bible, but only tell me about the Bible. You know, my mom, my aunts, and my grandparents, and everybody. They tell me, they don't ask me, but they are suddenly texting me like, "Hey, you know, looks like we've got a big discovery," and then you got to try to run around and deal with it. But that's part of it.
In fairness, it's the same thing on the other side.
What do you mean?
Somebody comes out, covers the thing, and it confirms something that's in there. And all the people who want to confirm are all running into.
Yeah, no, yeah.
confirming
Oh,
stuff.
yeah. Oh, for
Right.
sure. For sure. Absolutely.
You had a bunch of. Aren't there some fake schools that they were
Oh,
all
yeah. This is
excited about?
absolutely.
Right.
No, it's definitely on the both. Thank you for pointing that out. Hobby Lobby buys a lot of antiquities on the black market, and they've become sort of a target for selling forgeries. And so the Museum of the Bible, which is formed by the Hobby Lobby folk, have displayed and bought a lot of forgeries that have to be taken down and gone to lawsuits for and so on. There's been a lot of fake Qumran manuscripts that come out in the 2000s and 2010s. And they're all ones that sort of confirm readings that are popular Christians. And so, yeah, that was learning to detect forgery is an important skill for a scholar in this world, and that's why, yeah, because you have both people arguing for the historicity of the Bible in every respect and arguing against it in every respect, and they both end up running to the New York Times, and we all talk about it. But then, yeah, people. I don't think that the Telepot tomb actually ended up being as important, broadly speaking. Had any of you ever heard of it?
I remember it.
Yeah,
I've heard of it.
you heard of it. Yeah, it didn't become like a thing that people bring up a lot, but it was in the media for a minute. So, in any case, and that's kind of where we started class. Was there are ways to read the Bible, ways to look at archaeological evidence carefully, and there are ways to look at it uncarefully. That isn't from one side or the other, but it's from all different kinds of positions, right? Presuppositions, and then there's ways of thinking that you're being completely neutral, but that very neutrality can kind of make you cynical or make you faithful in another way. So it's always important to, in our own selves, figure out what we're looking at, how it's working for us. And I tend to be and sort of pursue truth, right? It's not just a matter of trying to not be taken in, but it's part of being a Catholic student of scripture and history is that I particularly enjoy as a Catholic student of scripture and history is that I don't have to be afraid of any particular truthful conclusion. And there's and that's really good because you can really go out there and run with it. And I hope that this has been helpful for you at all of those levels, but also made the scripture more rich and alive because these were real people doing real stuff, and it continues to astonish me every time I look at it and really think about like, hey, here's a coin that Nehemiah might have picked up, or here's a seal that Hezekiah probably used to stamp his jars. Like real people, real stuff. For those coming at it with faith, that real stuff is very much a part of it, because the way that God is unveiling truth throughout history is not like a once and for all kind of thing, but it comes in this concrete reality of particular times and place, and unfolds through it and in it in a very important way. So that is been, I hope, part of the horizon of the course, and that's what we'll do, and I'll give you a little pitch if you're sitting in on this and you aren't in a program but you'd like to audit some more. We've got Bible going every semester at St. Bernard's. The fall we've got Introduction to the Old Testament and the Book of John. And I hope that my goal for teaching is that whenever I'm teaching something, you're going to get a bit of any other course that I would teach, right? So if you're taking archaeology, you're going to read a text of the Old Testament. If you're taking Old Testament, you're going to encounter some archaeology. And I also teach ethics, and all of it, I'm thinking about hermeneutics and ethics and philosophy and how to approach the world and how to live. You know, and sometimes some of those are going to come more to the fore and come back. There's going to be less archaeology and moral theology. It's going to be, but like I hope,
Not everything touches.
yeah. But it's a holistic thing. So if you enjoyed this, I hope you'll consider joining us again for another course. But really, I've enjoyed getting to know each of you, especially with Jamie. Man, Jamie's been in every single course I've taught practically at St. Bernard's. He's coming on a.
That's true.
You're gonna pass up Tom Polati for courses in a row. But I've enjoyed getting to know new faces very much. Really happy to have you showing up from different parts of the country. Yeah, I hope you've had a good time, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you all. So, yeah. This is this is sort of the end. We're a little bit before the bell, but are there any questions before we head out?
Yeah, I was wondering, like, the Jews who lived in Galilee during the time of Jesus, where, like, did they come up there from Judah, or how did they end up there?
Great question. So, there's some of them would have settled up there eventually well before then. Oh yeah, they likely spread from Judah. Sorry, yes, they spread from Judah for sure. Yeah, because your groups that were sort of continuously non-Judean were sort of hostile entities, like Samaritans, like Idumeans. So they would have, some of them may have existed up there throughout the time of the exile, but more likely as the kingdom of Judah expanded during the Hashmonean reign and Herod's reign is when many of them would have gone there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought it was interesting.
I have a question.
Go
Go ahead, Joshua.
I thought it was interesting that it was Samaria was actually, which I didn't realize, that Samaria was actually in between Galilee and Judah.
Yeah, that's why Jesus are passing through it. Yeah, I know. I love that question because it points out, there's a real cultural difference between Samaria and Judah, and there is also a real cultural difference between Galilee and Judah, but there are different kinds of cultural differences, right? So
yeah.
There's a real cultural boundary between Samaria and the rest of the area. And the cultural difference between Galilee and Judah is one more of, rustic versus urban. Whereas the difference between Samaria is they're following a different religion and they don't consider themselves to be Jews, right?
Yeah.
So, even though they're within the boundary, they're all in the same governmental structure. So thank you. That's great.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Regina.
I was wondering if talking about the stratigraphic layers, what you label the occupation layer. This is a really dumb question, but the occupation layer, does it have to be the floor, or can the occupation layer be higher than the floor level that you're excavating?
And that would be higher. So you're going to see a lot of the evidence for occupation, like in the refuse and the floor and the clay, but like the walls, and sometimes when you uncover a certain layer, you're dealing with the whole structure, right? The whole series of walls, and sometimes, so that'll be part of the layer. Yeah.
And the second question I had, what happened to the sea people?
Well, they became various other peoples that we can identify. So
Okay,
sometimes they disappeared into the culture, and sometimes they became a separate thing. The Philistines. The Philistines originated from the sea peoples.
right.
They weren't purely sea
Okay.
people, but they originated from the sea peoples. The sea peoples destroyed those major Canaanite cities, Gaza, and those cities, Ashkelon, and then they inhabited them. And then they, some of them married Canaanites and so on, so they weren't.
Oh, got it.
But that's the source of some of their cultural differences, like they didn't circumcise, which not only Israel, but a lot of Canaanites did. But the Philistines didn't. Thus, you uncircumcised Philistines, because they came from Mycenae and not from Canaan. Yeah. And you also get Goliath's armor described in very Greek terms, which is either evidence of Philistine culture hanging around, or that portion was written way later. I don't know for sure what that is, but his armor looks very Greek. Yeah. So yeah, the sea peoples, a variety of things happened, but the Philistines are part of it. Yeah. Any other last questions?
Professor,
Yeah.
the sects that we've been looking at of Judaism, did any of them survive the destruction that we would recognize today?
The Pharisees became the rabbinic Judaism. Yeah.
Okay.
The direct line, that's not a sort of hypothesis. It's like Pharisaical Judaism turned into rabbinic Judaism, and was a direct sort of line of rabbi to rabbi down the line, right? So
Okay.
they which is why it's always extremely important to be careful how we talk about the Pharisees. Because when the Gospels are written, the Pharisees are one group of Jews, the Christians are another group of Jews, right? And they're fighting with each other. Later on, the Pharisees become rabbinic Judaism, and Christianity becomes Christianity, and they're fighting with each other. And then later on, after that, Christianity wins decisively and does some pretty unfortunate things to rabbinical Judaism at various points in history, right? So that is part of the legacy we have to be aware of, and just say, okay, when we deal with the Pharisees, we don't have to go pig love or say like, when Jesus says they're whitewashed students, we gotta understand why, and deal with that. But we want to be careful not to. Rabbinic Judaism both came from the Pharisees and is distinct from it, because it developed over thousands of years without a temple and in sort of a permanent diaspora. So we got to make those distinctions, but it does come from it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thank you all. It's been really lovely, and we'll have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Yvonne. See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Very good, thank you. Professor.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming in. It's really fun to have always having to lecture at both places, but it's really nice to have people in the room. Yeah. 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 How far away are you from you?
About half hour.
Half hour? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that means it should have been your release.
Yeah, one night of class 3 weeks ago, I go into my office on campus.
Yeah.
To Zoom, and it was a terrible rainstorm, and it was a flood, and it began to come in, and our it's really old building, it's kind of tilted this way and this way.
Yeah.
When I came in at first, like it was for class, the carpet was a little wet, it always happens. I went into the mail and came out, it was actually a puddle slowly coming down the hallway.
Oh,
So a few times during class, I had to like turn off my video, get out and check to make sure it wasn't, it never made it to my office.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's a great story.
biblical, right. biblical flood.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's great. How far away well, where is it's Niagara, right?
Yes.
Where is that?
It's in, technically it's in Lewiston, but it's right kind of in between Lewiston and Niagara Falls.
Okay.
Right on the Canadian border.
Right next to the power.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
literally, yeah. We sold our
Okay.
land to them. We used to have a golf course, I think. Well, we're gonna mention too, I was thinking of this during this course, actually.
Yeah.
I know your schedule is crazy during the semester, but we have I kind of help direct send it to the study practice of religion.
Yeah.
And we like to do talks over time, and especially over this past year, a lot of it was through Zoom.
Yeah.
So when, if at all, if I could reach out to you, if you'd be interested, I'd love maybe like a panel with like, either with whatever you most like to talk about. We can
Yeah.
spit it into a panel discussion.
Yeah. Count on me for that anytime.
Oh, that'd be
Once
wonderful.
it's to me, I love doing stuff like that.
Okay,
So it'd be great.
that'd be really cool. Yeah, we've done neat stuff.
Yeah, I love doing it. I love college students, so I really like this environment. But that's fine. But I've worked with college students for a lot of years.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So I'm always happy to be back.
That'd be really cool. Yeah, this, sitting through this class, I was thinking, it's great. I think like a lot of students in Niagara, faculty, we don't get exposed to, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think we have a religious studies department, we do great stuff, but I don't think they're really,
Right, yeah.
or not just archaeology, anything. All
Yeah.
the other stuff.
Yeah, sure. Excellent.
Okay, oh, that'd be great. Yeah, now that things are loosening up.
Yeah, sure, if that's possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they are on campus. The other day we got an email that they took down all COVID signage. They ordered us, like, if it's in your building, take it down.
Yeah.
Well, don't read it. But anyway, so the point being.
Might be going back up.
Yes, exactly, right. Yeah, exactly. Well, they got an email, we're helping move stuff back, and they're moving all this furniture back into the classrooms, so we don't have to be 6 feet apart anymore. Oh, yeah. And but then they sent an email to faculty to come move in, then I'm like, I turn on the news, like, Delta surge.
Yeah.
Get 3 days.
They just, a couple days ago, they just put out an email. They were on the fence about it.
Oh, Niagara.
Yeah, for students, students are back, they have to be, or, like employees.
Yeah.
But they were no, and then I think last Wednesday, the guy said, oh, yeah, sorry, you do. Which is fine, but I mean, it's, yeah. How do you?
Where do you stand at?
I have natural immunity. No one's gonna make me
Yeah,
get
no.
a vaccine that is unproven until I need it.
They do have exemption, I mean, they're allowed for exemption. I don't know if you can find it, but they already have.
Well, the exemptions at St. Fisher do everything.
Oh, is that it?
So that's not. Especially if you're going to like nursing.
That's a good point, yeah.
I raced to Syracuse.
I like the travel. So I like it.
Yeah, I have, I don't know, I have various health things, like, I don't want to do it. For me, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
oh, that's it.
Yeah, we can both them.
Yeah, but, yeah, I love it.
Oh, that'd be really cool. Yeah, definitely, we'll reach out.
Yeah.
That's your thoughts. That'd be awesome. Yeah. It's a good group, it's a small, you've been in, did you go to that? Yeah, okay, so it's a small campus, but it's really pretty. Yeah, come at the right time of year. It looks really nice. Yeah, we just won't take it to my building. Crooked it.
Yeah.
Are you still over in the one-story Tyron Hall?
That's where criminal justice is.
Oh, okay. No, this is in between O'Shea and Brusky Village.
Oh, yeah, I didn't talk about that.
One story. H.
Yeah, that's Timon, yeah. That's this one story.
Oh, that is Timon?
The H, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's squirrels crawling around the ceiling.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember she heard a scratching up in the roof. She was like, this kind of ceiling. She moved up and there was a squirrel sticking his head through.
That was an A repair when I was.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's,
Doesn't change. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, we'll definitely be in touch.
Work area, we, you know, this is where it's agro. Oh, yeah, so many. It's the third one. The guy is like, you know, really, he's our third.
That's what it's been, too many faces.
But on this one, they don't send you anything. So I would have done that. There's no like monthly obligation. You gotta come back and buy, you know, like $6 a year and then you get a discount. $6 a year. But I feel guilty. There's a good reason to come to the area. I've been traveling to get my balls. Hungarian wine.
Right across the border, that's a lot, from what I hear a lot too, Niagara on the Lake.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Oh, yeah. It's fun to go down to feel like this. Yeah.
Oh, if you go down there at the right time, it's just the aroma is completely overtaken.
Yeah.
All you can smell.
Tons of directions, but this Niagara region, there's still extremely good wine, and it's like tastings are about half the cost.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah. And there's some people do kind of weird, wacky stuff. It's like,
That's also half the cost of the wines. It's just,
yeah.
everything's kind of scaled.
Yeah.
Alright, I got a guy that's one of my old army buddies just came in and his wife passed away. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet. They're doing a benefit for him at the license station, so meet him there.
All right, I will. Perfect.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I definitely will, yeah. That'd be so- It's one of the essentials, it's hard to get started there. Yeah, it was weird, like, there's no chain of command, but me and one of my colleagues started that, we were both in criminal justice, but we're kind of branching out like other sociology, religion.
Yeah.
Interested in it. But hey, let's start this center. Never had one. And it was a surprise, it was a Catholic institution.
Yeah.
And I went up, I went like to the dean and the provost, and then it just like stalled, for literally a year and a half. And he's like, oh yeah, the president said we need the bishop's permission. I'm like, what, why? Well, and he didn't even think, you know, he's like, it didn't make sense, like, why would we need permission to start a center? Yeah, to come up teaching there, I'm not a theologian.
Right.
So then it's funny, he just, the academic kind of, you know, administration, he passed it off to the assistant provost, and that guy's like, yeah, let's just get it done. Let's put out an announcement. We'll let the provost officer back it, and we'll go on a second. It's like, right, that's all you have to do. And it's like, you don't have a budget, but like, all right. So they let it, you know, you can create a center, and then you can bring a collaborative, we have a center for medical ethics, we've done some like stuff on COVID. Stuff like that. So it's been really, now that it's there, and you know, we have like one of our English faculty members is a priest.
Oh, yeah.
So he does a lot of his research now on like you know, theology, literature. It's really, really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So he's given some stuff to the center. Just a neat way you get people across all these, like someone in education, someone in business doing this kind of research.
Yeah.
Well, religious studies, of course.
It's the most fun. We had some stuff like that when I was in grad school. It's like,
Yeah.
one of my favorite talks I heard on it was like a guy in the sociology department. Sociology, religion. And
Yeah.
He gave a fascinating talk. We became friends.
Yeah, it's just, it's right, it's the interdisciplinary, when you see how many things we touch on,
Yeah, exactly.
on religion. You know, like, so we have the religious studies, they do great stuff, they're
Yeah.
really fascinating, but it's like, then we found out, there's people in sociology and art departments, who do doing stuff, was it nursing, we had economists, looking at, I think, the impact of like Catholic education, or maybe just Christian education in general, private school, on like later adult outcomes.
Yeah.
Just really cool stuff. Nobody knew, even though we're a small college, we didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when you have the scene about the centers created, I got a psychologist who was like, oh yeah, I study Jungian psychology and how it relates to religious belief or something. I'd love to talk on that. Yeah, it's just that.
I'm glad you do that. That's cool. Because people like that, they wouldn't do it otherwise, because they're not going to come to the Department of Religion. They're like,
right.
I'm not an expert, that's your turf.
Exactly.
You would need to like invite me, but I don't know how to ask. You know,
Right, and
yeah.
then they get busy and do other things, and it never starts up.
Yeah, exactly.
And then once the ball gets rolling, and rooted in Catholicism, but just broadly speaking. it's a Catholic school.
Exactly.
Like beyond that, that pretty much means everyone.
Anyone wants to say?
Yeah.
or-
You want to hear about.
That's so fun.
It really is, yeah, it's neat, and just get to see the different ways to have students do presentations on. I think we had a Muslim, Jewish, and Christian talk about like prayer. We had 3 different sessions. One was on prayer, one was on, I think, religious practice, and the last one was on pilgrimage.
Oh, yeah.
We had 3 different perspectives, and they got as many, usually the students talk about it. It was really cool.
Yeah.
To see too, just to see these young undergraduates talking to like one Muslim talking about, growing up throughout the Middle East for a little while, and here, about practicing faith, and finding Muslim here, and just, it was really cool. And then, yeah, so it's a neat opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. It's fun to be in a Catholic place that has that kind of diversity experience too.
Yes.
You don't get that at statistics and for the most part, we just sort of doing stuff. So because it's a school for adults going to ministry.
Right. It's gonna be limited,
Most
yeah.
of them come here.
Exactly, right, yeah.
Which is fine, this is, we'd probably take them, but why would they?
Yeah, they can roll, yeah.
But I love this, I think it's, I really think it's good for us.
I agree. I think that's kind of what the initial, one of my ideas when we were trying to form it, well, why do you want this? I'm like, well, whatever you decide, like the question of faith is so important, especially in the young adult years.
Yeah.
Whether you decide it's not for you or it's for you, and if so, what type of faith, that answer doesn't mean it matters, but it doesn't matter for the center. Like it matters that we help you explore. Exactly. That you realize this is a part of your development, just like your education, social life, just, how you respond to faith.
It's like, and it is missional too, and because like, that is for a student who's outside of that, like if they're going into a community where everyone's already in and like they have a language, that is scary.
Oh yeah,
It's very scary. And you go, so,
oh my gosh, yeah, right.
I did a lot of that in grad school and was fully committed and also adult and like
Right.
And I would go to Orthodox Jewish church because I was curious and wanted to learn about it. No, it's still cool.
Oh yeah,
For me,
It is.
30-year-old,
yeah.
when you're 18.
Oh yeah, you're right, because you're a little unsure of it, depending how you're brought up, you might not know much about it.
Yeah. You feel very subconscious when you walk in the room.
Yeah.
Stuff like this, none of that.
Yeah, because
Especially if you have 3 different people up there, and they're giving you their sincere faith,
right.
but you aren't in a community where everyone else shares that.
Exactly, right, exactly, right, walking into like a Catholic Bible study or a Protestant Bible study.
Yeah.
I have to believe what they believe, or they're gonna keep calling me or something.
Exactly.
And they get nervous, right, and this is like, yeah, kind of, we love to have a forum, also was basically, you just need enough people engaged on the panel, like, basically any question goes. Yeah, you know what I mean, like, and you almost build it for skeptics. I mean, our job isn't to convince them, but it's your job to say, hey, you got questions, we'll ask. We're not afraid of questions, like you were saying before, Catholics shouldn't, and I agree. Yeah, we're not afraid to pursue the truth. So no questions really out of bounds. Exactly. And students, they had one of the groups on campus, not at the center, but another student group, Christian student group, had one of those forums, 100 students show up, which for now is a lot. Right, and they just said, look, any question you have about religion, about Christianity, just ask us. And it was really positive. And it's just a way to get them to know, this is something interesting. If you believe, great. If not, that's in the end, that's your choice. Yeah. But we're just something to facilitate it. But in a non-intimidating atmosphere. Yeah. That's great. So so that'd be really cool. I appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. It really is.
Yeah, St. Bernard's, so sure, be very happy with the idea too.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah. So we'll try to shoot for something in the fall. I mean, work around your schedule too.
Yeah.
Teaching schedule and everything.
Yeah.
I'm flexible. Yeah. So we can do it.
Very cool.
Cool. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Really great class.
Yeah, thanks for coming to 2 of them. I was really pleased.
Yeah. I was like, as soon as I saw it, the weeks with my wife teaches at a dance studio, my daughter does dance, does ballet and gymnastics.
Yeah.
I was like, well, it's got to be Tuesday. Because when you mentioned the class, you're going to do archaeology, and so the first, like, oh, this is awesome. It's Tuesday, I can do it. And the second one's on Tuesday. I'm like, this is great. Yeah, let's do it. No, no, this is really cool. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, good. All right, thanks. Rick.
Have a good night. You too. Take care. Do you need help with it?
Nope, I'm good. Got it.
Take care.
Hi, Megan. My name is Charles. I am Charles Puff, B2FF. I have a reservation with this night, and I'm on the way. I'm going to be late. Oh, is this which? Where's Harvard? Oh, yeah, that's where I'm at. And I called the wrong place. Sorry for that, Megan. So- Yes, I do. Thank you. Thanks very much. You too. You too. Bye. Hi, Melissa. My name is Charles Scott, HUFF, this is Frank. And I have a reservation here tonight. I just want to let you know I'm going to be late. For 1 a.m. Okay, good. It's 9. Yep, I should be there before 1 a.m. Sorry? Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You too.